This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. We're doing an acoustic set this evening. We have some technical problems. Israeli soldiers who photographed themselves smashing a statue of Jesus in southern Lebanon. They did it with a sledgehammer. Well, they've been sentenced to 30 days in military detention. Meanwhile, Donald Trump met with Israeli and Lebanese peace negotiators. He welcomed them in the Oval Office after saying it went really well. Both Lebanon and Israel have agreed to extend their 10-day ceasefire to 3 weeks, although the president of Lebanon says, I will not talk to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump said he's planning to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun sometime in the next couple of weeks. There's no shame in negotiating with Israel if it ends this war and recovers southern Lebanon. That's what Lebanon's foreign minister said after the 3-week extension was announced. And Lebanon's president, Aoun, said all he cares about is economic recovery, reconstruction, and getting Israel out of southern Lebanon. The prime minister of Lebanon, Nawaf Salam, said there will be no agreement unless Israel pulls out of southern Lebanon. He also said Hezbollah is a separate issue that Lebanon will deal with internally. So Lebanon and Israel are going to begin their second round of talks inside the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. It will not be attended right now by the Israeli prime minister or the Lebanese president. Meanwhile, nobody's negotiating with Hezbollah, which is who Israel is fighting, especially in southern Lebanon. Wafik Safa said that he's the spokesman for Hezbollah. He said, we're not going to obey any results of talks between Israel and Lebanon that are mediated by the United States. So you really can't understand the Strait of Hormuz and why it's closed until you really start following Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon, because Iran created Hezbollah to protect the Shia Muslims living in Lebanon, and they will not, I don't see them opening Hormuz unless something's resolved between Hezbollah and Israel. Pakistan, meanwhile, is hoping to jumpstart a second round of peace talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad. As you know, last Tuesday, it was Tuesday night, Trump extended that ceasefire indefinitely. Meanwhile, the Senate Democrats say they're planning to force weekly votes on a war powers resolution. This despite Republicans in both the Senate and the House blocking all of them. On May 1st, the War Powers Act kicks in. So Trump, he's got his ceasefire now with Iran, but he is doing the naval blockade in Hormuz. May 1st is the 60-day deadline when he either has to end this war in Iran or get a war authorization from Congress. Republicans in Congress say it's not a war. We don't need to give him an authorization. We're out of weapons, and what I've reported on this show, it turns out it's a lot worse than anybody has told us. There's new data being leaked from the Pentagon, enemies within, enemies of Pete Hegseth within, and there's some new analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And in the 5 weeks that we dropped 13,000 bombs on Iran, we have gone through 45% of all our precision strike missiles. You're familiar with the THAAD interceptors? Those are, we gave some to Ukraine. We had to take some back and put them in the Middle East. They shoot missiles out of the sky. We're down to half of what we had before the war started. We're down 50% of all our Patriot missiles. 30% of our Tomahawk missiles have been depleted, and about 20% of several other advanced weapons systems are been depleted. It takes years to rebuild, especially since our military-industrial complex has other customers. They sell this junk to like 30 other countries around the world, and they're telling our military, get in line. You know, you got to pass that $200 billion war supplemental and prove to us you're a good customer. Meanwhile, because we have people in Finland and Sweden and Korea who have money on the table, and we're going to obey those contracts. So President Donald Trump, indefinite ceasefire with Iran. He's claiming, I'm waiting, don't rush it. I'm looking for everlasting peace with Iran. And his cover is, I can't negotiate with anybody in Iran because I decapitated their leadership and they're fighting amongst themselves. No, that's projection. We're fighting amongst ourselves. The Iranians are pretty much united. And senior Iranian officials say that, no, we're good. We're good. They issued statements independently saying, we're all on the same page. Iran's president, Pezeshkian, as well as the parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, issued statements saying, quote, there's no such thing as moderates and hardliners in Iran. We're all on the same page. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said all of Iran's state institutions are acting with absolute unity and discipline. Now, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf is the Speaker of the Iranian parliament. He was the lead negotiator the last time talks were held in Islamabad, and he issued this statement. In our Iran, hardliners and reformists don't exist. We are all Iranians and revolutionaries, and will make the criminal aggressors regret their actions with national and governmental unity in total compliance with our supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. And you had the head of the judiciary put out a similar message. They're not opening up Hormuz. Now they've announced that they've collected tolls, and they're mocking Trump. I don't know if you've seen any of the Lego videos. They're taunting Trump. Meanwhile, the world's largest condom maker says it has to raise prices 30% because the Strait of Hormuz has driven up the cost of raw materials and chemicals, forever chemicals that go into the making of a condom. The largest condom company in the world is called Carex. They're out of Malaysia, and they produce 5 billion condoms a year. That's not a lot. Only 5 billion a year. For me, that's a good weekend. This is the mop-up. I don't have sex. I just try on 5 billion condoms for the weekend, imagining myself having sex. I'm David Feldman in New York City. This is an acoustic set. I've had some technical difficulties today, so bear with me. We'll try to get through this show today, I hope. The United Kingdom, much of whose colonial wealth was built on tobacco, has just banned smoking for anyone born in or after 2009, thereby creating future generations of smoke-free adults who will get to die from global warming instead because America refuses to reach the carbon emission goals set forth by the Paris Climate Accords. I can't imagine our doing this here in the United States. The British Parliament this week banned the sale of all tobacco and vaping products to anyone born in 2009 or after. Never happened here in the United States. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we're getting new reports that Bobby Kennedy Jr., Donald Trump's chief of Health and Human Services, forbid our Centers for Disease Control from publishing a new study revealing that last winter, the number of Americans rushed to an emergency room because of COVID cut in half, all thanks to the COVID vaccine. That's the Trump administration. Why give any good news about vaccines? Hey, remember the war in Afghanistan? Remember that? Remember Afghanistan? We fought more than 20 years in Afghanistan. We fought the country that didn't attack us on 9/11. That was Afghanistan. No, don't confuse it with Iraq. That's the other country that didn't attack us on 9/11. We invaded two countries after 9/11 that had nothing to do with 9/11. Well, anyway, Afghanistan. I want to talk about Afghanistan for a second. That was the good war, at least according to then candidate for president Barack Obama. He got elected insisting that George W. Bush took his eye off the ball by invading Iraq when he should have been focused on defeating the real people who attacked us on 9/11. No, not the Saudis, Afghanistan. He perpetuated the lie, Barack Obama, that Afghanistan was behind 9/11, that the Taliban were behind 9/11. I don't know if you've noticed this, but every time we go to war, it's a lie. I know Donald Trump is very convincing each day when he comes up with a new reason we're going to war with Iran, but I hate to break it to you, it's always a lie. The Saudis and the Pakistanis were behind 9/11. They aided Osama bin Laden, but Pakistan and the Saudis are our allies, and you can't attack your allies just because they brought down the World Trade Center and poked a hole in the Pentagon. That's not what friends do. You don't attack your friends just because they are responsible for the worst attack on our nation's soil in American history. No, what you do is you wage war on Iraq, which had nothing to do with it, or the Taliban, who had nothing to do with 9/11. In fact, the Taliban 3 times immediately after 9/11 offered to help our CIA find bin Laden. They kind of knew where he was. He was up near Tora Bora, going back and forth between Afghanistan and Pakistan. They said, we can block the passage. We'll help you find him. We know some warlords up there, but George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld said, no, we don't want him. Not the way you're going to deliver him. How are they going to deliver him? Well, the Taliban said, we'll help you find bin Laden if you promise to give him a trial. That was what the Taliban said. Put him on trial in a third country, and America needs to show proof that he was behind 9/11. 3 times they made that offer, and 3 times George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld said, no, there can never be a trial for Osama bin Laden. Why? Same reason all flights in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 were grounded here in the United States, except for the private jets carrying Osama bin Laden's relatives back to Saudi Arabia. A lot of them were in Kentucky on 9/11. And nobody was allowed to fly except bin Laden's family that did business with George W. Bush's family, so there was never going to be a trial of Osama bin Laden. Anyway, I'm getting to a larger point. We waged war in Afghanistan for more than 20 years. And because we don't speak Dari or Pashto, we needed locals in Afghanistan to act as interpreters. You know, we needed somebody who spoke the language to tell local villagers, hey, sorry, we accidentally blew up your elementary school. Thousands and thousands of Afghanis worked with American soldiers for more than 20 years, risking death at the hands of the Taliban should the impossible ever happen. I mean, it wouldn't happen, but, you know, after more than 20 years in Afghanistan, America loses and the Taliban are back in charge. You know, they risk their lives helping American soldiers as interpreters. And it was dangerous, assuming, you know, worst case scenario, America pulls out after 21 years and the Taliban are back in charge. Well, yeah, it happened. We lost. And it's not safe for the American collaborators in Afghanistan, which is why before pulling our troops out back in 2021, President Biden signed an executive order entitled Operation Allies Welcomed. Operation Allies Welcomed. It provided temporary protected legal status to more than 75,000 Afghanis and their families who assisted our military. But now there's a primary, a big Republican primary runoff for Senate in Texas, where John Cornyn, the incumbent, is challenged by Republican Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. And because Ken Paxton is giving up his job as state attorney general, there's also a Republican primary runoff next month for the post of attorney general. And that's where Texas Congressman Chip Roy is hoping to win the nomination. And all three of them are fighting to prove to voters in Texas they hate Muslims more than their opponent. All three of them are calling for the ban of all Muslims being allowed into our country. And they are specifically warning that thanks to Joe Biden, we're about to allow thousands of radical Muslims from Afghanistan. We're going to allow them to invade our country and force Sharia law on our women, meaning they're going to assault our wives and daughters, because that's what Fox News and the Republican machine has accomplished. They have made the raping of white women synonymous with Sharia law. Well, many of the Afghani interpreters and their families that Biden promised asylum to, some of them have been brought into our country, but there are thousands in limbo. They are stranded. They can't live in Afghanistan, so they're in Pakistan and Qatar, living in what amounts to refugee camps, incredibly unsanitary hovels, waiting for America to keep its promise and let them into our country. But Trump is saying no. The people who risk their lives to help American soldiers free Afghanistan from radical Islam, Taliban is radical Islam, the people helping us fight radical Islam in Afghanistan have been labeled radical Muslims who are trying to invade America. Again, these are the people who help fight the Taliban. Now, Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11, but they are horrible people. They persecute women and members of the LGBTQ community, just like those Republican candidates in Texas. So Trump has a diplomatic problem because Pakistan and Qatar don't want the Afghani refugees who we promised to take in. What to do? What to do? On Tuesday, the New York Times reported that Donald Trump is secretly trying to ship at least 1,100 Afghani refugees who we promised asylum to. He's secretly planning to ship them. These are the ones in Qatar. He's going to ship them to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where 7 million people are already refugees. So the Trump administration figures who's going to notice 1,100 more from Qatar, originally from Afghanistan. So he's going to send the people who helped our soldiers as interpreters, he's going to send them to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where nearly 27 million right now are facing acute hunger. And thanks to Donald Trump, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't look like it's going to be open by June, meaning millions and millions more in the Republic of Congo will either starve to death or face massive food insecurity. Thank God he didn't get rid of USAID. Thank God Marco Rubio's in charge of USAID, and we're sending food and medicine to the people in the Republic. Oh, right, I forgot. So that's where Trump is going to send the Afghani interpreters who risk their lives to help America combat the religious extremists torturing women and members of the LGBT community in Afghanistan. Well, if anybody is fluent in Pashto, how do you say Donald Trump is an effing douchebag in Pashto? Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971. My mother used to scream at them on the phone. I'd say every 3 months they would call. My mother donated to the Southern Poverty Law Center, but it was never enough. And she started giving to them in 1971, and they kept calling her, and I would hear her screaming, "How much? How much do I have to give to you until you stop calling me?" They're good fundraisers, and they're a good organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And here's why you should be giving to the Southern Poverty Law Center. It was founded in 1971 to make certain that states in the old Confederacy, the South, obeyed all the laws, rules, and regulations contained within the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and 65. The Southern Poverty Law Center, these are lawyers taking the old Confederacy to court, making sure local and state police, prisons, and governments are not violating these civil rights belonging to marginalized communities, especially people of color. So they do it in the civil courts. They bankrupted some chapters of the KKK, and they, up until Kash Patel became FBI director, they worked in tandem with the FBI. They would turn over information to the FBI to help the FBI indict. So these are lawyers, paralegals, investigators. They are not doing this from the safety of an office in Washington, D.C. or New York City. They are, as Vietnam veterans used to say, in country. Southern Poverty Law Center is headquartered in Montgomery, Alabama, which, as our Vietnam veterans would also say, they're in the shit. They're in the shit. These are not Harvard or Yale law school dilettantes hiding in the Northeast trying to earn their liberal bona fides by filing lawsuits on behalf of Black prisoners in Mississippi without ever having to go visit the prison in Mississippi. These are lawyers, paralegals, community activists, working and living in the communities where it's not safe to be Black, Hispanic, Muslim, or gay. And if the Northeast liberal douchebags in the Democratic Party did that, we would win in Arkansas and Texas and Mississippi and Alabama. But these Harvard, Yale-educated liberal douchebags, they don't want to live with the people they're supposedly caring about. So these are lawyers and paralegals living in Montgomery, Alabama, where, thanks to this Republican Party, it's not safe to be Black, Hispanic, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Arab, or gay, handicapped, a woman, a child. Thanks to Donald Trump, Mike Johnson, Pete Hegseth, Fox News, America isn't safe for anyone who isn't a straight, white, male, Christian rapist. Now, Republicans hate the Southern Poverty Law Center because it's loaded with highly educated people who monitor hate groups. And then they turn that information over to the FBI, while at the same time, they sue the hate groups in civil court. They have, as I said earlier, sued several chapters of the KKK into bankruptcy. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you should go there. They have a great website. I use it all the time. They keep a database of hate groups and extremist organizations that spread hate and violence. It's available to the public on its website. Go to the Southern Poverty Law Center's website, give them money. They need it now. I'll get to that in a second. And it's a valuable resource. So, what is a hate group? According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's any group or organization that openly fights against the rights of individuals who can be described by immutable characteristics. Immutable means it's something about you that is immutable, can't be muted, can't be changed. Being a person of color is immutable. This is stuff you're supposed to be taught in preschool, that you don't attack anybody based on what they cannot change. What you can't attack or make jokes about. You can't make jokes mocking the way somebody was born. Can't make jokes mocking the way somebody was born because they're way too funny. Those jokes are the funniest, and you're going to laugh so hard you'll hurt yourself. You don't persecute or mock people based on their immutable characteristics, even though it's the funniest. They're the funniest jokes, but you don't do that. You don't do that. So what is an immutable characteristic? Being a person of color is immutable. Being a member of the LGBTQ community is immutable, despite Republicans insisting it's either a choice or something that can be cured through prayer. How's Kristi Noem's husband doing? He quit Christian rehab and went back to cross-dressing. Now he's back in Christian rehab again. Let's hope the prayer works. Being a woman is immutable, despite Democrats saying that can be cured. Being an immigrant, immutable. Belonging to a religion is immutable, despite Republicans insisting heathens amongst us can be converted. The Southern Poverty Law Center protects Americans, primarily in the South, Americans, immigrants, migrants who belong to groups who tend to be persecuted because of their immutable characteristics. And the people who persecute people based on their immutable characteristics, for the most part, vote Republican. This is why Republicans don't like ending up on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of violent extremists or hate groups. This is why they hate the Southern Poverty Law Center, because the Southern Poverty Law Center is fearless. It tells the truth. And a lot of Trump supporters, a lot of organizations that contributed to Donald Trump, Focus on Family, for example, the Alliance Defending Freedom, for example, they have made it to the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of either hate groups or right-wing extremist groups that are threatening the rights of marginalized communities. What has happened since Trump first entered the political landscape is MAGA Republicans began to insist that the Southern Poverty Law Center persecutes white people based on white people's immutable characteristics. Republicans insist we can't change who we are. Who are we? We are white Christian bigots. Seriously. That's their legal argument. We're white, and our religion tells us blacks, Arabs, Hispanics, immigrants, the LGBTQ community are worthy of our contempt and are second, third, and fourth class citizens because they don't belong in our country. That's my religious belief. It's in the Bible. They say we are heritage Americans who can trace our ancestry back to the white Protestants who founded this country, and that's an immutable characteristic the Southern Poverty Law Center is using to persecute us. I'm going to talk about heritage Americans because this is a new phenomenon. The term gained traction in 2025 last year. It really gained purchase at Turning Point USA's big convention in Arizona in December. So I'll get to Heritage Americans in a second. But I want to talk about Turning Point USA, because that's one of the organizations that the Southern Poverty Law Center has been monitoring, and it's the reason the FBI and the Department of Justice made this big announcement about the Southern Poverty Law Center. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, Turning Point, this is Charlie Kirk's, now Erica Kirk's organization. The Southern Poverty Law Center says Turning Point is not an official hate group. Didn't make the cut. But it did fall under two other categories of extremist groups. They list it as an anti-government extremist group and a hard right extremist group. Southern Poverty, and this is what the big announcement this week is all about. Turning Point. The Southern Poverty Law Center says Turning Point promotes white Christian supremacy. The Southern Poverty Law Center also says Turning Point USA calls for an America dominated by white Christian men. The Southern Poverty Law Center said Turning Point USA is heavily funded by far-right extremists who are very much in league with organizations that can be labeled hate groups. So they're saying it's not a hate group, but it's funded by hate groups. according to its annual Hate and Extremism report issued last May. This is what the Southern Poverty Law Center said about Turning Point USA. Charlie Kirk's, now Erica Kirk's, Turning Point USA. This is what they said. Quote, and this is brilliant writing. This is it. This is all you need to know. Because they're not just talking about Turning Point USA, they're talking about the MAGA movement. Quote, Turning Point USA's primary strategy is sowing and exploiting fear that white Christian supremacy is under attack by nefarious actors, including immigrants, the LGBTQ community, and civil rights activists. Turning Point USA and its spokespeople often warn their audience that their children, wives, religion, way of life, and they themselves are under attack by various constructed enemies. Constructed enemies. Turning Point USA exploits complicated feelings of insecurity and anxiety to manufacture rage and mobilize support to revive and maintain a white-dominated, male supremacist Christian social order, unquote. Rewind what I just read to you and play it over and over again if you want to understand why this country ended up where it is. So, there's a serious problem with that statement, and I urge you to rewind it. The problem with that statement from the Southern Poverty Law Center is every single word is true. And that's a problem for the Southern Poverty Law Center because bigots, racists, white Christian nationalists, misogynists, anti-Semites do not like being called what they are. I always talk about calling somebody on their BS. Everybody has a little game, a little internal narrative to justify their horrible behavior, all of us. And if somebody calls you on your BS, your real BS, when you tell a Democrat that they're really Republican, they'll punch you. When you ask, this has happened to me where I sit down with my Democratic friends and just go over what they believe. I explain to them, you're a far right extremist. And they get really angry. Well, Republicans don't like being shown proof that they are crypto-fascists, neo-Nazis, that they're on the same page pretty much with you-know-who. And the trick I have found when I do talk to Republicans is get them to say it out loud. Just get them to say what they believe out loud. It's fascinating to watch their head shake when they say it out loud. That's what Frank Luntz, the ones who use linguistic gymnastics, which twists their heads. So you don't, the dog, Lee Atwater talks about the dog whistles. You no longer say you hate black people or gays. It's about something else. But when you push these people on why they believe what they do and you get them to say what they really mean, their head shakes. So, Republicans, thanks to people like Frank Luntz, who twists words and language, Republicans have succeeded in masking their intolerance, their neo-Nazi tendencies, by cloaking all of it in religious and political freedom. I'm not upset. I don't hate black people, Arabs, or Jews. I just want my religious and political freedom protected. First Amendment, I should be allowed to scream the N-word. It's protected by the First Amendment. That's what these people say. So, what Republicans have done is first they twist words, and you can't think without language. So they break language down so people can't think. They can't articulate. They lack the vocabulary to say what they really mean. So they don't realize they're neo-Nazis. It's all about now religious and political freedom. I'm not a racist. I'm not a bigot. I'm not a homophobe, a misogynist. I just want my religious and political freedom. The same way Donald Trump commits massive fraud and crimes, and then when he's sued or criminally indicted, he immediately calls it political persecution. That's the secret. If you're about to be criminally indicted, run for office and accuse the prosecutors of political persecution. And organizations like Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk's, he co-founded it, they maintain that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a bunch of Christian-hating Democrats who want to punish people like Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk for their political and religious beliefs. We're not racists. We just want our political and religious beliefs protected. So they hide under the cloak of religious and political protections afforded them by the First Amendment. And you had Charlie Kirk, who was the leader of Turning Point. He was able, and I hear he was a nice guy. I know people who met him, and they said, he was wonderful to debate. I'm really sorry. It's a tragedy what happened. I'm told if you met him, he listened and he was willing to debate. And I'm sorry for his wife and the people who follow him and his children. But he did promote what I believe to be horribly racist ideas. And he claimed this was not racism, it was his political and religious belief. Therefore, if you criticize me, you're the bigot. You're the intolerant one. You're the left-wing extremist. And it's not just Charlie Kirk. I mean, this logic, this twist, is deployed right now by the nearly six of the 9 justices who sit on the Supreme Court, trained by Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society. They're pushing religious freedom in America. And what does religious freedom mean? It means we don't ban Muslims from entering this country. That's what you would think religious freedom would mean, that we would never ban Muslims from entering this country. We think religious freedom means Pete Hegseth, as Pentagon chief, wouldn't be allowed to cancel a Good Friday Catholic Mass while at the same time hold a Good Friday Mass for Protestants only. But that's exactly what he did, yet he'll claim that's religious freedom. So you probably have heard by now about John Phelan. He's the billionaire who Trump named to be U.S. Navy Secretary, and he was fired yesterday by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. A couple of reasons why. One is Trump wants these Trump-class ships built immediately, and they're going to be called Trump-class naval destroyers. And John Phelan was slow on the delivery of that. He said, you're going to have to wait a couple of years. We're at war, and this is not our top priority. That's one of the reasons Phelan was fired. But he and Hegseth did not get along. And he is the 34th senior official inside the Pentagon to be dismissed by Pete Hegseth in the past year. He's getting rid of anybody who was a child of the Enlightenment or is black or a woman or transgender. U.S. Navy Secretary John Phelan replaced by Navy Undersecretary Hung Gu. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, Hung Gu. His last name is Gu, I think, C-A-O. I looked it up, Hung Gu. He's a 25-year naval combat veteran, and he is now the acting head of the U.S. Navy. So in the middle of the naval blockade of Hormuz, Pete Hegseth got rid of our Navy secretary in the middle of a war with Iran, replaced him with acting Naval Secretary Hung Gu, who is a devout Christian nationalist who has openly called for the mobilization of Christians around the country to stand up for Christ. This is who Pete Hegseth wants running our Navy. This is what our new Navy Secretary said during an interview back in 2023, warning about communities losing their Christian faith. He said, quote, "There's a place in Monterey, California called Lovers Point. The original name was Lovers of Christ Point, but now it's become Lovers Point. They took out the name Christ. And so, because of that, Monterey, California is a really dark place where there's a lot of witchcraft. The Wiccan community has really taken over there, and we can't let that happen here in Virginia," unquote. So that's Monterey, California. Isn't that where Pete Hegseth was accused of rape? Isn't that the place where Pete Hegseth did something so he had to pay a woman $50,000 so she'd be quiet and not say he raped her? I believe it was in Monterey, California. And, you know, I don't know if he raped her, the woman. He did have to pay the woman $50,000. I read the police report. I'm just saying, maybe if the people of Monterey went back to calling it Lovers of Christ Point instead of Lovers Point, maybe Pete Hegseth wouldn't have had to dish out $50,000 in Monterey to shut up a woman who claimed he raped her. I don't know if she's telling the truth. I do know his sister-in-law was willing to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee during the confirmation hearings that Pete Hegseth beat her sister, that she used to hide in the closet and call her. I do know that, and she filled out depositions during their divorce, and she was ready to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee. And Tom Tillis, the senator, Republican, promised her, I'm going to let you testify. And then he chickened out because he was getting death threats. Read Rolling Stone magazine. Tom Tillis said, I can't let you testify. The death threats are too much. And had he voted against Pete Hegseth would not have been confirmed as Secretary of Defense. And Thom Tillis isn't running for re-election. And now he's back to pontificating about how nothing gets done in Washington, D.C., and nobody has balls, and he's ranting. Thom Tillis, I'm going to watch my language. But you don't promise. Anyway, moving on. So, religious freedom in America. It does not prevent Republican senators. You would think it would prevent Republican senators, members of Congress, presidents, defense secretaries from saying in their official capacity as a government employee that our country was founded on Christian principles and that Islam is incompatible with those principles. That's what Pete Hegseth has said. Congressman Randy Fine, Senator Tommy Tuberville, the Speaker of the House. Should I continue? No, that's not what religious freedom doesn't prevent Republicans from talking that way. For Republicans, religious freedom means my faith, my deeply held religious beliefs forbid me from baking a cake for a same-sex wedding. My religious beliefs are being trampled upon when the library in our public schools has books about homosexuals or books that tell the truth about slavery. They've taken Martin Luther King and Frederick Douglass out of Texas school books because it's offensive to certain groups of people. Pete Hegseth follows Pastor Doug Wilson, who celebrates the old Confederacy because it was a Christian nation. Pete Hegseth worships with Pastor Doug Wilson, who says slavery was mutual affection between the plantation owners and the slaves. Under the guise of religious tolerance, the most intolerant people in America are claiming victimhood. I've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene say Christians are the most persecuted minority in America. That would be like Jews in Israel complaining about anti-Semitism. Why would Marjorie Taylor, and she means this, why are they being persecuted? Because there are laws on the books preventing Christians like Marjorie Taylor Greene from persecuting gay people, transgender people. That's what she believes. And these bigots, they are bigots, or Republicans, they shift the goalpost on what constitutes religious freedom. They will bend Christianity into whatever it has to be, so long as it has nothing to do with anything Jesus ever said. Which is why these Christians, and you know this, they don't quote the New Testament. Everybody knows this. They don't quote the New Testament. They never quote the New Testament. They quote the Old Testament, which uneducated Jewish people think is a compliment. If you're Jewish and uneducated and you hear Christians quoting the Old Testament, you think, oh, they like our book. No, schmucko, that's not your book. The Old Testament is not your book. The Talmud is. Read a book. If you think the Old Testament is the book for Jews, you need to read a book. You're stupid. On Tuesday, speaking of stupid, on Tuesday, in honor of something called America Reads the Bible, where Christians are being urged to participate in a week-long marathon reading of the Bible, Donald Trump recorded a video that was streamed to the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. And in this video, I'm sure you all saw, I thought it was AI. It's real. It's Trump reading from the Bible. It is Donald Trump sitting behind his desk inside the Oval Office reading from the same book he conveniently forgot to place his hand on while taking his second oath to be president. And Tucker Carlson said Trump didn't place his hand on the Bible when he was sworn in as president in January of 2025. Tucker Carlson said he didn't place his hand on the Bible because Trump, said Tucker Carlson, is the Antichrist. And who am I to disagree with Tucker Carlson? Anyway, Trump read from the Bible, and because this was an event at the Bible Museum for Christians, and because he was playing to the Christians, devout Christians, evangelicals who voted for him, Trump read from the book of Matthew. And this is what Trump read from the book of Matthew. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And the Lord saith, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. You should listen to Trump read that. I get the chills hearing him read that. And then Trump read from Luke, quote, sell your possessions and give it to the poor. And it's beautiful, truly beautiful words. Nah, I'm just messing with you. He didn't read from the New Testament because there's nothing in the New Testament that Christians like Donald Trump and his Republican Party could ever cite to justify their bigotry, greed, and intolerance. There's nothing in the New Testament for these Christians. They have to go back to this is why they hate the Pope. They have to go back to the Old Testament to quote the Bible, which again, I hate to tell some people say, well, they might as well be Jews. No, Jews don't work off the Old Testament. I know we have some uneducated Jewish people who listen to this show. In the Jewish religion, the Old Testament is not the blueprint for a righteous life. Around the same time that Jesus came around, they began rewriting the Old Testament. They kept it as it was. It got canonized, but the rabbis in Babylonia with the Responsa and then the Talmud began writing rules that are kind of like the New Testament on how to behave, justice. The Old Testament is for people who lived a savage people from thousands of years ago. By the time Christ came around, the Jews needed something. That's why Jesus came around. And that's why the Jews wrote the Talmud, because the Old Testament didn't really, the same way our Constitution became outdated, the Old Testament was outdated. I mean, I love reading the Old Testament. It's hysterical, especially in plain English. Read it in plain English. It's one of the funniest, sexiest, most violent books you'll ever read. But it's irrelevant. Nobody sacrifices goats and a hectare of barley in order to get forgiveness from God after they accidentally struck their slave in anger. Deuteronomy, you know. It's an Old Testament, big book, has some great stories, some history that may or may not be true. And it does have Mosaic laws, specifically 613 commandments, including the top 10. And the top 10 commandments are not insane. I don't disagree with any of the top 10, and that's why they made the top 10. If you obey all 10 of the top 10 commandments, you're on the road to a righteous life, and that's pretty much all you have to do. But there are 603 other commandments in the Old Testament, the ones nobody likes to talk about because it reveals how irrelevant the Old Testament is and why the Jews had to write a Talmud around the same time as Jesus. For example, in the Old Testament, one of the 613 commandments that didn't make the top 10, I wish it did, one of those commandments are you're forbidden from wearing an outfit of clothing that combines wool with linen. Linen is plant-based. Wool comes from sheep. Your clothes, according to the Old Testament, are either plant or sheep. Can't be both. And if you're willing to go out in public wearing a suit made from wool and linen, according to the Old Testament, you must be stoned to death, or at least banished from the community. I could go on, and other people have. The Old Testament is gigantic. And if you're a crazy religious fanatic, you can find anything in it to justify any regressive behavior. Like you want to own slaves? In the Old Testament, the Old Confederacy called itself a Christian nation, but they were citing the Old Testament to justify owning slaves. You want to sleep with your sister? You could find something in the Old Testament. You can find anything. You know, if you squint hard enough while reading the Old Testament, you can find a passage telling you not to pleasure yourself. There's nothing, I don't think, anything in the New Testament that forbids taking care of yourself if nobody else will. But people are convinced it's in the Old Testament. They cite the book of Genesis. It's the story of Onan. I named one of my sons Onan. What a great name! Why doesn't anybody at least name their dog Onan? I've had several dogs who should have been called Onan. You know who Onan is? Onan had an old, you know what onanism is? Onanism is the practice of taking care of yourself because nobody else will. Pleasuring yourself. So Onan, this is from the book of Genesis. Onan had an older brother who died. Very sad. And all of Onan's family's wealth, his parents' wealth, was supposed to be passed down to Onan's older brother, primogeniture, right? The older brother gets all of it. You've seen Downton Abbey, right? Speaking of Onanism. So all of I don't know what Onan's last name was. I'm going to say Hefner or Guccione. Maybe Flint. Let's say Hefner. Onan Hefner had a very wealthy father, and the wealth was supposed to be passed down to Onan's older brother, but the older brother died. And according to Old Testament law, Onan was required to marry the wife of his older dead brother. Now, it didn't matter if Onan was already married. He had to have two wives, according to Old Testament law. Polygamy. The Old Testament, if you're looking to be a Mormon, you can find it in the Old Testament where it says it's okay to have multiple wives. Not multiple husbands, by the way, because the Old Testament was written by men. Or at least the laws in the Old Testament were written by men, because laws are written by people who are physically stronger than others, because they can enforce the laws. That's why most laws are stupid. Anyway, Onan Hefner, Jewish man, by the way, he was commanded to marry his dead brother's wife and make babies with her. And the Hefner money, the family's money, would all be left to the new children that Onan made with his older brother's wife, and none of the Hefner family fortune would go to Onan's children that he had with his first wife. Book of Genesis, Onan. And this is why you can't masturbate. This is why you're not allowed to masturbate. So pay attention, because this is very important. You know how many thousands of generations have felt guilt from masturbation? This is where it comes from. Seriously, I'm being serious. This is the only commandment in the Old Testament. This is, so Onan's first wife, when she found out about this, didn't like it. My kids get nothing while you're shtupping your new wife? That's not my new wife. It's my brother's wife, and I have to have sex with her. It's the law. I much rather have sex with you, but God will punish me if I don't have sex with my older brother's much hotter wife. So Onan's first wife said, "Go to your whore." It's in the Bible. She said, "Go to your whore." And Onan said, "She's not a whore. She's my dead brother's jasmine-scented, incredibly hot wife. She's a whore. Go to her." So Onan went to her. And before knocking on her door, he looked up to the heavens and said, "O Lord, you are a cruel and merciless one. Why hast thou commanded me to shtuppeth my dead older brother's incredibly hot wife with those sumptuous and firm breasts, smooth and silky legs, and protuberant yet not intrusive ass? Why are you making me do this?" And God looked down and said unto Onan, "Fine, I'll do it." And Onan said, "No, let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's for the New Testament. You get to stoop somebody in the New Testament. So I'll do it." And God said, "You sure? Because if you're not in the mood, I'll do it." And Onan said, "No, a commandment is a commandment." And God said, "Not really." And Onan said, No, you commanded me. I'm going to obey." And God said, "You really don't have to do this, Onan." And Onan said, "No, I really do." And so Onan entereth his dead brother's wife's bedchamber, and he removed his linen robe, not a trace of wool, in his linen robe. And as Onan walked to his sumptuous dead brother's wife, in his nakedness, he beheld her shimmering eyes and six-pack abs from the hour each day she took to do Soul Cycle. And she said, as he quivered, she said, "Onan, I'm ready." And before Onan could even touch his dead brother's wife's hand, Onan spilled his seed all over the ground. That's a true story. Or at least it's a true story from the book of Genesis. Onan was supposed to impregnate his dead brother's incredibly hot wife. I don't know if she was that hot. They don't mention that in the book of Genesis. But before he could even get next to her, his wooden staff did sneeze. I think that's how they describe premature ejaculation in the Old Testament. His wooden staff did sneeze. I'm translating it off the original Aramaic, so maybe that's how I translate premature ejaculation. His wooden staff did sneeze. Actually, it's been so long since I read this chapter of the Bible. I think it's been a week, so I forgot. I haven't read this in a couple of years. It may not have been premature ejaculation. I'm pretty sure. But this is why you're not allowed to touch yourself. This is the only part of the Bible, new and old, that your parents and religious leaders can cite to make you feel guilty for pleasuring yourself. So I think that the truth of the story is he was actually going at it with his dead brother's wife. And just when he was about to, send settlers into her West Bank, is that he was going to send his settlers into her West Bank. Right before that, he pulled out, and all his settlers spilled to the floor. That's what I think is I'm not making this up. I think that is the story of Onan. He was supposed to impregnate his dead brother's wife, and they're going at it, and then he realized they're going to have children, and these new children will get all the money instead of my children, and he pulled out and spilled his seed on the ground. And God said unto Onan, "Hey, Onan, you tricked me." And Onan said, "How did I trick you?" And God said, "I offered to do this myself." You said, "No, I got it, God." That's what you said. I got it. And the one thing I needed you to do, you ended up not doing. And Onan said to God, "Well, I did some of it." And God said, "No, you didn't do any of it." And Onan said, "No, I did most of it." And God said, "No, most of it would be getting her pregnant, and then for some reason she couldn't carry the baby to term. That would be you doing most of it. But pulling out before you can impregnate her is none of it." And Onan said to God, how about we agree to disagree? And God said, look at what you did to her nice parquet floor, spilling your seed all over it. Someone's going to trip and break their neck. Go clean it up. You disgust me, said God. So Onan found a gym sock and began wiping up his seed. And God did watch this in disgust and said, you know what? You really piss me off, Onan Hefner. I've been working on my anger issues, but you really pushed me over the top today. And Onan said unto God, cool your roids. And God said, what are roids? And Onan said, you know. And God said, no, I don't know. And Onan said, your roids, the things inside your bottom that get inflamed when you're angry. Cool your roids. And God said, this is how you talk to your God? And Onan said, look, to be honest, I'm not sure you're even real. And God said, oh, I'm real, all right. And Onan said, you know, I've been drinking from that well down by the olive grove, and I'm pretty sure some of the lead-based fertilizer seeped into the water table because I've been having these weird hallucinations. And God said, really? Like what? And Onan said, well, for one, I imagined after my older brother died, I was supposed to marry his incredibly hot wife and make babies with her. And God said, no, you're fine. I told you to do that. That's not an hallucination. And Onan said, how I know you're not an hallucination? And God said, save that kind of talk for when your son comes home from college with his degree in cosmology. And Onan said, he's getting a degree in cosmetology, not cosmology. And God said, wait, which one focuses on the origin, structure, and nature of the universe? And Onan said, that's cosmology. And God said, right, I thought that was the degree your son was pursuing. And Onan said, no, cosmetology, not cosmology. He's getting a degree in cosmetology. And God said, which one is that? And Onan said, it's the practice of applying beauty treatments involving hair, skin, makeup, and nails. And God said, really? You can make a living doing that? And Onan said, I guess. And God said, you sound disappointed. And Onan said, well, it's not really how I was hoping my son would turn out. And God said, well, I gave you a chance today for a new son, but he ended up in that gym sock. Anyway, some of that may be true. And that's how Onan became associated with masturbation. Because God, at least in the book of Genesis, was so angry that Onan spilled his seed on the ground, he issued a commandment that said, thou shalt not spill your seed on the ground. But he wasn't really forbidding masturbation. He was saying, if you start a job, finish it. And if you don't finish it, don't leave it on the ground for someone to trip over and break their neck. I told you this wasn't going to be a good show today, that I've been having technical problems. So, as I was saying, anybody still here? Boy, speaking of onanism, that last 5 minutes was pure masturbation. As I was saying, Donald Trump recorded a passage from the Bible, but it wasn't anything Jesus said. It was from Chronicles, the Old Testament. It was all about God telling people to humble themselves before God. Odd that would be Trump's favorite passage from the Bible. So, there are three people primarily responsible for Donald Trump winning in 2024. Elon Musk, because of his money, Tucker Carlson, because of his sway, at least among the MAGA community, and Charlie Kirk, the co-founder of Turning Point. Charlie Kirk turned out to be a prodigious fundraiser for Trump. And Charlie Kirk had a get out the vote operation that rivaled Elon Musk's. So those were the three. Now, Charlie Kirk said he was against all immigration. He changed his tune over the past couple of years. The last year of his life, he was saying all immigration should be banned. And he said, if you're here, assimilate, become an American, only speak English. He was an America firster. And right after he was tragically assassinated, there were attempts to deify Charlie Kirk. Glenn Beck said he was our generation's Martin Luther King. Texas Congressman Troy Nehls tearfully claimed Kirk would be remembered right up there with the apostles who attended Christ's Last Supper. So it doesn't sit well with their narrative about Charlie Kirk being our generation's Martin Luther King or a disciple of Christ. Doesn't sit well when the Southern Poverty Law Center labels Charlie Kirk's organization a far-right extremist group that is heavily connected to hate groups. And that is why, on Tuesday, the Justice Department announced it was able to convince a grand jury in Montgomery, Alabama, where the Southern Poverty Law Center is headquartered. They convinced a grand jury in Montgomery, Alabama, to indict the Southern Poverty Law Center. The grand jury charged the Southern Poverty Law Center with defrauding donors. You mean like right after the 2020 presidential election, when Donald Trump raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from MAGA morons who he had convinced that money they donated would be spent investigating voter fraud, but instead he used that money to pay for Melania's stylist and all the lawyers he needed after he was indicted in Georgia and in Washington, D.C. for attempting to steal the 2020 presidential election, as well as paying all the lawyers after he was indicted for mishandling classified documents, and paying all the lawyers he needed to defend himself in a massive civil fraud trial, which he lost, the lawyers he needed in the E. Jean Carroll trial, which he lost, and of course the Manhattan criminal trial, which he lost. All of Trump's legal fees, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, were paid by MAGA morons who donated to Trump's super PAC, thinking the money would go towards election integrity. One of the lawyers getting paid by those MAGA morons, the donors, was Todd Blanche. He unsuccessfully tried to defend Trump in the Manhattan criminal trial. He failed, which is why Trump is now a convicted felon. And now Todd Blanche is acting attorney general, who announced the Southern Poverty Law Center's indictment on Tuesday. It was Todd Blanche, acting attorney general Todd Blanche, the beneficiary of donor fraud, right? He made all his money in 2023 and 2024. He was paid through a super PAC where MAGA morons thought they were donating to help Donald Trump look for OJ's killer or Nicole Simpson's killer. Remember that? No, they were donating thinking Donald Trump was going to investigate voter fraud, and he was using the money to pay his legal fees. That's fraud. It's wire fraud, quite frankly. It was Todd Blanche, one of the beneficiaries of Trump's wire fraud, who accused the Southern Poverty Law Center of misleading its donors. Why? Because some of the money contributed to the Southern Poverty Law Center was given to paid informers inside neo-Nazi organizations and the KKK, about $3 million. That's what this is all about. Todd Blanche said in announcing the prosecution that instead of bringing down hate organizations, the Southern Poverty Law Center was funneling money to these neo-Nazis and KKK members. Well, no, they were paying informers. But Todd Blanche said if the donors knew their money was ending up in the hands of paid informers, they would be outraged. Well, I donate to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Everyone in my family does. You should be donating to the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's founded by somebody named Morris Dees, I believe, who also was lead singer for Time, I believe. Or maybe that's a different Morris Dees. I don't think he collaborated with Prince. So I donate to the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, I didn't know they were relying on paid informers. I didn't know that. But if that's what it takes to keep a database on extremist groups, hate groups, if that's what it takes to build a case in civil court to bankrupt the KKK, here's some more money. The Southern Poverty Law Center had paid informers, and up until Trump became president, the Southern Poverty Law Center, in tandem with the FBI, they would turn over information from their paid informants to the Justice Department as friends of the court to help prosecutors mount criminal cases against these hate groups. But Kash Patel, the new head of the FBI, announced last year that the FBI would no longer work with the Southern Poverty Law Center because it had become, he said, its own hate group. So according to this indictment, the Southern Poverty Law Center, over 3 decades, spent $3 million on paid informers. This is what the Justice Department is going after. $3 million. You know what it costs the Justice Department to prosecute? Or it's never going to go to trial. But it's going to cost $20 million for the Justice Department to try the Southern Poverty Law Center over $3 million. But as always, it's not Trump's money, and the Justice Department is his law firm. He's using the Justice Department to get even with his enemies or the enemies of his donors. Nobody who donates to the Southern Poverty Law Center has a problem with that money going to paid informers. So why is the Justice Department indicting? It's to protect hate groups, which, the Trump Justice Department is one of them. That's why this bogus indictment was handed down. If the Southern Poverty Law Center has to drain resources defending itself from the Trump Justice Department, it can't go after people who helped get Trump elected. So you have no idea how angry it makes Republicans that the Southern Poverty Law Center lumped Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA in with far-right extremist groups. Because the logical extension of the Southern Poverty Law Center calling Charlie Kirk a far-right extremist, the logical extension is the Republican Party is a far-right extremist group, which it is. So I'm not going to give you a laundry list of all the things Trump, his administration, his Republicans in Congress have not just said about marginalized communities, but have done to them. We've done too many episodes to go over that right now. And this case will be thrown out because law enforcement and multiple civil rights organizations, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, rely on paid informants for decades. It's not a crime. But again, this isn't about winning a conviction. It's about using the Justice Department to tie up Trump's enemies in court and massive legal bills. In other words, the process is the punishment, not the conviction. They don't care about the conviction. The process of clearing your name is the punishment. Alongside Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche making this big announcement on Tuesday, we got the Southern Poverty Law Center. Making that announcement was our FBI chief, Kash Patel. Again, last year, Patel said of the Southern Poverty Law Center, it has long ago abandoned civil rights work and turned into a partisan smear machine. Their so-called hate map has been used to defame mainstream Americans and even inspired violence. So he says the Southern Poverty Law Center defames mainstream Americans. Yeah, because the Republican Party has mainstreamed bigotry, hatred, and violent extremism. Kash Patel. He was born, I'm going to talk about him for a second. He was born in America to Indian parents. His parents were not citizens when he was born in the United States. But thanks to the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship, he came into this world as an American citizen, something his parents were not. As you know, as FBI director, Kash Patel, a practicing Hindu, is part of a Justice Department that is attempting right now to get rid of birthright citizenship. He's also a QAnon conspiracist. Right before becoming FBI chief, he was selling a COVID-19 vaccine detox pill. That was what he was peddling, a pill that will remove the COVID-19 vaccine from your body. He's a QAnon conspiracist, deep ties to Donald Trump's America First MAGA movement. And that movement wants to block Muslims from entering this country, but it also wants to ban immigrants, especially people like Kash Patel's parents, immigrants from India. MAGA morons insist Kash Patel's parents, specifically Indian immigrants, are taking work away from heritage Americans. One of MAGA's biggest complaints is over the H-1B visa, which allows non-immigrant work visas for highly skilled foreigners. People from India are not just highly skilled, but they speak English, so they have become highly prized by American hospitals and tech firms, and this drives MAGA insane. It was Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, and this is why Kash Patel handed down these indictments on Tuesday to protect Charlie Kirk. It was Charlie Kirk who said last year, quote, America does not need more visas for people from India. Enough already. We're full. Let's finally put our own people first. They do not like Indian Americans. Big problem with Indian Americans. The people who voted for Trump don't like Kash Patel for the same reason they don't like the closeted Lindsey Graham, the senior senator from South Carolina. For the same reason they don't like Tim Scott, the junior senator from South Carolina, who happens to be black. So Tim Scott has his own suite of issues that I don't want to get into. He's a black man in a party that is targeting black people. I can't even begin to discuss the self-hatred that Tim Scott is suffering from to be one of Donald Trump's biggest supporters and to be black. There's a new lawsuit filed last week. It charges the Trump White House in 1 year fired 75% of all black employees working inside independent federal agencies. We see black officers in the Pentagon denied promotions, while Pete Hegseth proudly renames Army bases in honor of Confederate generals. So I'm not going to talk today about Senator Tim Scott's special brand of self-loathing. That's for another show. All I can tell you is being a black Republican senator from South Carolina is hell. It is hell. And it must be hell being a closeted homosexual senator from South Carolina. It's why Lindsey Graham always appears on the Sunday talk shows looking hungover. Now, I don't know if Lindsey Graham is an alcoholic, but that's what people are saying, and that's what people are reporting. Back around 2019, the Daily Beast had an article entitled, quote, "Lindsey Graham's drinking problem is no secret in Washington," where they quoted one of Lindsey's former aides as saying, quote, "Lindsey has a drinking problem. He's a functional alcoholic, but it's a problem. He drinks a lot, especially in the evenings." Senator John Kennedy, not the good John Kennedy, who was president. This is Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana. In his new book that came out in January, he wrote of Lindsey Graham, quote, "Invite Lindsey Graham to dinner, and you don't know if he'll sit down for an intelligent conversation or get drunk and vomit in the fish tank. But that's why I like him," unquote. Senator John Kennedy is, there's a reason he's beloved. He's at another level of both stupid and brilliant. He's kind of like Trump. You never know if Lindsey Graham is going to get drunk and vomit in the fish tank. I mean, what a picture. That is just brilliant. Well, one Lindsey Graham staffer anonymously told the Daily Beast, quote, "It's not a secret in the office Lindsey would come in some mornings looking rough. We all knew he was drinking heavily. That's why I love to watch Lindsey Graham on the Sunday morning chat shows, because he's, I believe, still drunk." Another anonymous Lindsey Graham staffer told the Daily Beast, quote, "He's been drinking more since he became more involved with Donald Trump. It's noticeable." Yeah, it's noticeable. From Politico in 2020, quote, "Multiple sources close to Graham say he has a drinking problem. that has become more pronounced in recent years. While he remains functional, several former aides expressed concern about his alcohol consumption. From The Hill in 2020, Lindsey drinks a lot. It's something people in his circle know about, but no one wants to talk about it publicly. So, Lindsey Graham, according to several reliable sources, is a drunk. Now, he's never been arrested for a DUI. We've never heard of any police reports, but from what I'm reading, from what I'm hearing, based on these news stories, it is a reasonable supposition that Lindsey Graham is a closeted drunk. Why? Because he hates himself. I think. I don't know, but I think, I believe, I suspect, with no proof, I suspect Lindsey Graham hates the fact that if his voters knew who he really was, they would hate Lindsey as much as he hates himself. I suspect Lindsey Graham hates the fact that he desperately wants to be accepted by the people in his party who laugh behind his back and to his face. We know they are laughing now to his face. In 2016, Lindsey Graham ran for president. Back then, he was still a John McCain buddy, and he called Donald Trump, quote, a con artist, a liar, a kook, a nut job. In December of 2015, right before the Iowa caucuses, Lindsey appeared on CNN, and this is what he said of Donald Trump. He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. He doesn't represent my party. He doesn't represent the values that the men and women who wear the uniform are fighting for. He then added, you know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell. This is why Lindsey Graham's drinking, according to reports, has become more pronounced since he became Donald Trump's lapdog. So that was in 2015. Within 5 months, by about May of 2016, Lindsey Graham had already endorsed Donald Trump for president. And he was terrified of Donald Trump because Trump did something and taught Lindsey not to mess with Donald Trump. Trump is evil, but he's mafia smart. During a rally in South Carolina, at the height of Lindsey Graham trashing Donald Trump went to South Carolina, got to win the South Carolina primary. Lindsey's from South Carolina. Donald Trump literally gave the crowd in the audience the cell phone number for Lindsey Graham. I remember when this happened, I went, what? I've never heard. He said, quote, here's Lindsey Graham's cell phone number. Give him a call. He won't fix anything. He can't, but at least he'll talk to you, unquote. And he posted Lindsey Graham's cell phone number. That is a supreme violation of privacy. And what was that about? Well, Trump knew eventually I'm going to need Lindsey's endorsement. And because, you can't fight with people in your own party. I'm going to need his endorsement, so I need to intimidate him. So Trump gave out Lindsey's cell phone number in a not-so-veiled threat. He was saying, I got your number, Lindsey. I know who you are. And if I'm willing to give out your personal cell phone number, then you know I'll have no problem really violating your privacy by giving out something far more secret than your cell phone number. And Lindsey got the message. Well, he got a lot of messages. His cell phone became unusable because all of Trump's supporters began calling him. And it was then that Lindsey Graham debased himself for Donald Trump. He recorded himself good-naturedly taking a baseball bat to his cell phone. He was supplicating himself before Donald Trump. It was an act of debasement. Your personal cell phone number is given out by Donald Trump, and he literally took a baseball bat to his cell phone and said, "My bad. Like, I've learned my lesson. Don't mess with this guy." And he then became Trump's lapdog, plays golf with him, brags about being on the links with Donald Trump, loves the proximity, loves it. But in order to tamp down the rage and self-loathing that comes from being someone's frightened little toy poodle, apparently Lindsey has to drink. That's why he shows up seemingly hungover on the Sunday talk shows, and it's why he wants to send American ground troops into Iran. There's a lot of rage being tamped down inside Lindsey Graham or Kash Patel, and it comes out in horrible ways. In Lindsey's case, we need to send ground troops into Iran. So I want to be careful here. It's one thing to be a closeted homosexual. That is not a crime. And it's nobody's business how and whom you choose to love. And if you want to stay in the closet, I don't blame you. It's not easy to come out of the closet. There's probably you may not need to come out of it. Nobody has the right to tell you how you should or shouldn't address your own sexuality. Unless you're a Republican senator, in which case that makes you a sociopath for variegated reasons. And I've enumerated countless times on this show why it makes you a dangerous sociopath, and you all know why. You are getting people just like yourself killed. You're forcing a lot of people just like you to end up with no choice but to commit suicide. So it's nobody's business if you're in the closet, and you have every right to stay in the closet unless you're a Republican government official who is participating in what amounts to the torture, I won't say the torturing of the LGBTQ community. And it makes you really sick in the head. It's why you drink, right? That's what you have to do. Which brings me back to our FBI director, who also serves as one of Trump's loyal lapdogs. Now, the base hates, detests Kash Patel for one reason. His parents are Indian. He's a person of color. He's not a real American. He's an anchor baby. His parents were not citizens when he was born here. And no matter how much Kash Patel tries to be accepted by the people who detest him, no matter how much hockey he plays and coaches, he knows deep down inside all he'll ever get from the Republican Party is grudging respect that will quickly dissipate once Trump throws him to the curb, which will be any day now. Any day now. Patel isn't, as Trump would say, from central casting. And eventually Trump is going to need to placate Congress or his MAGA base by tossing more bodies out the window. And when it comes to sacrificing, he'll either choose a woman or a person of color. First it was Kristi Noem. Then it was Pam Bondi. Last week it was his labor secretary, Chavez, and Lori Chavez DeRemer. 3 women all gone in a little more than a month. Trump has no problem getting rid of women, holding them accountable for misdeeds he would be more than happy to overlook if they were committed by a man. So he's going to, there has to be turnover that you have to sacrifice. He could get rid of Linda McMahon. She's Secretary of Education, but she's an old family friend. There's Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture. Kelly Loeffler, Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Tulsi Gabbard could be next. I could see him getting rid of Tulsi Gabbard. He's not going to get rid of Susie Wiles because she's his White House chief of staff, but she's just been diagnosed with breast cancer, so he's not going to fire her, although you never know. I think Tulsi Gabbard could get tossed. She's been willing to do his hard work, his dirty work. She made a criminal referral last week to the Justice Department regarding the activities of John Brennan, Obama's CIA director. She accused Brennan of treason for the role he played in convincing the FBI to launch an investigation into Russia's collusion with the Trump campaign during the 2016 presidential election. That was the good deed she did for Donald Trump. She also showed up in Fulton County for some reason when they seized the ballots. But she's also testified, and this is why I think she's probably going to be fired next. She also testified that the entire United States intelligence community told Donald Trump that Iran gave up its nuclear weapons program in 2003. So I could see him firing her for providing one of the many pieces of evidence that this war is based on a lie. And she's a woman. But I think it's Kash Patel. I think it's Kash Patel because Kash Patel is a lightning rod and a person of color. Earlier in the week, Kash Patel announced that he was going to be suing The Atlantic magazine for $250 million after they came out with a report last Friday exposing Patel as an unhinged alcoholic whose drinking has made him a national security risk. So while Patel was announcing the indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center, I think this is a picture of Kash Patel making the announcement, he was asked about the story in The Atlantic magazine, and Patel insisted he never once sipped alcohol on the job and said, if you continue to report that I do, I will see you in court. Jamie Raskin is the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. After that Atlantic magazine story was published, Raskin announced Democrats would begin investigating Kash Patel's drinking, claiming Patel's drinking, as reported in the Atlantic magazine, poses a risk to national security. Jamie Raskin is demanding Kash Patel submit to the World Health Organization's alcohol use disorders identification test. It's called AUDIT. It's an acronym, the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test. It's a 10-question screening tool that identifies harmful drinking patterns. And Jamie Raskin wants Patel to fill out the questionnaire and then submit the results to Congress in a sworn statement under the penalty of perjury. So if Democrats take back the House, Kash Patel, well, I don't think he's going to be here by then. He is threatening to sue everybody. I will see you in court. How dare you? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm suing Atlantic Magazine for $250 million. Well, on Tuesday, a Houston judge tossed out a defamation lawsuit filed by Kash Patel against Frank Figliuzzi. He's a former FBI official who gave an interview with a television news reporter. And during that interview, he said Patel, quote, had been visible at nightclubs far more than he has been on the 7th floor of the FBI headquarters, unquote. So you sue. Kash Patel sued. The judge threw it out on Tuesday. He called the statement, quote, rhetorical hyperbole, which the judge said is protected by the First Amendment. The New York Times on Thursday said the FBI launched an investigation into a New York Times reporter. She was the one who broke the story, the big story, back on February 28th about Patel's use of the FBI's private jet, how he used it to shepherd his girlfriend around the country and attend performances given by her when she sang professionally. The New York Times also reported that Patel has assigned SWAT teams from multiple FBI field offices to protect his girlfriend when she goes outside. The FBI was contacted by the New York Times, which wanted to know why you were investigating the reporter who broke that story. And the FBI said it began the investigation after the story came out and Patel's girlfriend began receiving death threats from that story. And FBI agents wanted to know if that reporter from the New York Times had violated any anti-stalking laws when she was gathering information about Kash Patel's relationship with his girlfriend. So, can't be easy being a Republican of Indian descent, an anchor baby like Kash Patel. Can't be easy for Kash Patel wanting Republicans to like him. Now, I don't know if the article in the Atlantic magazine is true. They have multiple sources claiming that Kash Patel is a fall-down, knockout drunk. I don't know if that's true, but there are reports that he's unhinged, that the FBI had to use a tool from a SWAT team to pry open his door when he was unresponsive, that he was allegedly so hungover, he slept through his wake-up call, and the FBI had to kick open his door. Can't be easy being a person of color wanting desperately for Republicans to accept you. Which brings me to Vivek Ramaswamy, who ran for the Republican nomination for president in 2024. Now, he is probably going to win the May 5th Republican primary for governor of Ohio. Like Kash Patel, Vivek Ramaswamy is a practicing Hindu of Indian descent. I believe it's Indian descent. I do know he's a practicing Hindu, and I know, like Kash Patel, Vivek Ramaswamy is the beneficiary of birthright citizenship. He would, as Donald Trump would say, he would be an anchor baby. Both of Vivek Ramaswamy's parents were Indian immigrants who were not citizens when Vivek's mother gave birth to him. Now, she became a citizen. His father, last time I checked, never became one. It's been a year since I checked, but as of a year ago, Vivek Ramaswamy's father didn't love America enough to become a citizen. And despite being the beneficiary of birthright citizenship, Vivek Ramaswamy adamantly opposes birthright citizenship and wants to get rid of it. And when you ask him, well, aren't you the beneficiary of birthright citizenship? And he says, well, it's different. It's different. Like when my daughter, when Republicans need an abortion for their daughter, it's different. Now, you might remember Doja was supposed to be a partnership between Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, but Vivek, after about 3 weeks, was forced out by Elon Musk, who I have no doubt, being a product of South Africa apartheid, didn't like sharing responsibilities with Vivek Ramaswamy. Let's not forget that Elon Musk is one of the biggest contributors to Alternative for Germany Party and Tommy Robinson in Great Britain. So Vivek was pretty much forced out of Doja, and he decided, well, you know what, I'm going to run for the Republican nomination for governor of Ohio. And again, that primary is May 5th, and he should expect to win at least the nomination. He's poured $25 million of his own dollars into a campaign war chest that right now has about $50 million. And this will be a really interesting governor's race. Can Ohio Republicans, come November, Ohio Republicans have become increasingly racist since Trump entered politics. Can they elect the child of Indian immigrants? They elected J.D. Vance to be their senator. He was the one who started the lie that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were eating cats and dogs. Okay? So it will be interesting to see if Republicans, racists in Ohio, can bring themselves to vote for the child of Indian immigrants, a beneficiary of birthright citizenship, a multi-millionaire who serves as a reminder to white MAGA racist voters that people like Vivek Ramaswamy are coming to America and taking good jobs away from stupid, hardworking white Americans. This is not rhetorical hyperbole. You cannot overstate how important a role pigmentation plays in Republican politics. And it will be interesting to see how heavy a lift it's going to be for Vivek Ramaswamy to ask the racist Republican voters in Ohio to ignore his Indian heritage. Ann Coulter said to Ramaswamy, after he dropped out in 2024. He was running for president in 2024. Ann Coulter said, quote, "I would not have voted for you had you got the nomination for president because you are an Indian," unquote. That's what Ann Coulter said, unapologetically. "I would not have voted for you because you're an Indian," unquote. You cannot overstate how important a role pigmentation plays in Republican politics. After she said, "I would not have voted for you because you're an Indian," Ramaswamy thanked her for her honesty. That's got to wreak havoc on your innards, being forced to say to Ann Coulter, "Thank you for your honesty." Nick Fuentes is a Nazi, self-described Nazi. He had the #1 podcast on Spotify until Spotify heard what he was saying and they took him down. The dirty, dark secret on Capitol Hill is Republican male staffers under the age of 30 love Nick Fuentes, who has promised to go to Ohio and knock on doors telling Republicans not to vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, specifically because he's Indian. Repeatedly on Nick Fuentes' #1 rated show, he has said Ramaswamy should, quote, "go back to India." But he wasn't born in India. He was born in the United States. See? It's got to be tough being Kash Patel, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. Got to be tough. Dinesh D'Souza. Got to be tough. After Charlie Kirk's assassination, leading voices in the Republican Party began filling in for Charlie Kirk. He was book solid, so MAGA voices toured college campuses to keep Turning Point USA alive. Vivek Ramaswamy, appeared at a Turning Point event at Montana State in October of last year. It was right after Charlie Kirk's assassination. Charlie Kirk was scheduled to appear, and Ramaswamy filled in for him. And there was a question and answer period. And a young woman asked Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a practicing Hindu, he was asked this question at a Turning Point USA event in October of 2025, quote, "Christian voices should be the main voice of America, and I want to know basically why you seem to be, and I don't mean to be horribly offensive, but why you seem to be masquerading as a Christian," unquote. You don't mean to be horribly offensive. I'm surprised someone attending a Turning Point USA event at Montana State had even a clue that what she was saying could be seen as horribly offensive. Christian voices should be the main voice of America. That is what she said, and that is what Turning Point USA believes, which is why it got labeled a far-right extremist group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, I don't know if Kash Patel is in fact an alcoholic. And I don't know how Vivek Ramaswamy deals with this. But if I were of Indian descent, but felt the need, if I were Kash Patel, but felt the need to protect Turning Point from the Southern Poverty Law Center, if I felt the need to announce an indictment of the Southern Poverty Law Center because they went after Turning Point USA, if I felt the need to do that so maybe Republicans would like me, I would be shooting heroin into my eyeballs to tamp down the self-loathing, the rage, and the anger. J.D. Vance is married to Usha, who, like Vivek Ramaswamy and Kash Patel, also of Indian descent, and who, like Kash Patel and Vivek Ramaswamy, is also the beneficiary of birthright citizenship. So one would think the incredibly racist J.D. Vance, because his wife is a beneficiary of birthright citizenship, would be for birthright citizenship, but he calls it, quote, the dumbest foreign policy in American history. And she stays married to him, and she's pregnant with his child again. Interesting. These are some really sick, self-loathing people. But to J.D. Vance's credit, he was against the war in Iran. So you got to give him some credit there. In October of last year, J.D. spoke at a Turning Point USA event at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, in Oxford, Mississippi. Charlie Kirk was scheduled to speak, but he had been assassinated, so our vice president filled in for him. And part of that evening was taken up by a discussion of what it means to be a real American. Now, before he was killed, Charlie Kirk had openly embraced the great replacement theory and said, we have to protect our culture before we get replaced. He said, quote, everyone says, well, we just need immigrants to come legally. We just need immigrants to come legally. That's not true. You need to have the proof that you are all in. None of this like multiple passport stuff. None of this dual citizenship stuff. We have a heritage to preserve, unquote. And this was the beginnings of Heritage Americans, which didn't gain any purchase until December of last year, the term Heritage Americans. So this was in October in Mississippi. During a Q&A, a woman in the audience asked our vice president this question. This is Turning Point USA. Quote, you are married to a woman who is not Christian. She still calls herself Hindu. You are raising 3 kids in an interracial, cultural, racial, religious household. How are you maintaining? How are you teaching your kids to keep your religion ahead of their mother's religion? As in, you can't possibly be running for president and telling us you're raising your children as Hindu. Our vice president's answer was, I've asked my wife to convert, but she won't. He said, I wish she was a Christian, unquote. So brave. Now, even if Usha Vance converts to Christianity for political expediency, that doesn't change the fact that she is the beneficiary of birthright citizenship and she is not white. And there have been many articles written about how J.D. Vance is suddenly discovering what's been uncorked, the kind of messages that are sent to his wife, that Vivek Ramaswamy when he ran for president, saw what had been uncorked. Vivek wrote a piece in the New York Times coming out against the concept of heritage Americans. So Vivek Ramaswamy's race, which there's no such thing as race, but his Indian descent, his heritage, it's going to be a big story after he wins the May 5th Republican nomination for governor of Ohio. Because Republicans have a big problem with Indians, same way they have a big problem with Jews and the Chinese for the same reason, right? They lump them all together as in those are overperforming cultural groups who are making us poor. So it'll be interesting. So what we saw in December at this big Turning Point USA event in Phoenix, Arizona, this was the big coming out party for Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica. It's where she made it official and declared, "I will fill my husband's shoes. I will be the voice, the face of Turning Point USA." It's where she endorsed J.D. Vance for president and announced millions of Turning Point USA money will be spent on field offices in Iowa to help J.D. Vance win the 2028 caucus. And it was at this Turning Point USA event in December of last year where Vivek Ramaswamy spoke. Some say he got booed. He got scared because he saw at this December event for Turning Point USA where the term heritage American was getting locked in to the right-wing vocabulary. Now, heritage American, the term heritage American, it began nibbling on the edges of mainstream Republican politics when Trump was sworn back into office. But it has since taken root in December of 2025. It's where it gained purchase, as I keep saying. I like saying gaining purchase. Makes me feel smart. In December of 2025, it took hold at the Turning Point USA event in Arizona. It's where right-wing Republicans, white and Christian, openly declared that heritage Americans are real Americans. Throughout 2025, they were asking the question, who's a real American? To which I reply, who cares? Republican Party cares. And the answer is real Americans are those who can trace their ancestry back to the Mayflower, or at least back to our nation's founding. People who can trace their ancestry back to the white Protestants who founded our country. That makes you a real American. You have seniority, and it is your culture that must be preserved. And if you want to come to America, you're not welcome, but if you make it here, do it our way or we send you home. Now, a lot of times people write to me and say that's not true. And I say, Google it. Google it. What is the plan? What is Stephen Miller's plan? The plan is to deport 100 million people. The plan is to empty out the country, deport 100 million people. Now, people say, well, Stephen Miller, his parents are Jewish. His grandparents were immigrants. Well, Stephen Miller is just, why would you expect consistency from a Nazi? But this isn't only about immigrants. This is about people who don't belong here, like me and you. You could be citizens, but you don't belong here. And the plan inside this White House is to deport 100 million people. And that was an announcement made, I think about December of last year, by Kristi Noem, who was head of the Department of Homeland Security. She was in charge of Border Patrol and ICE. In fact, she tweeted out a picture of a beautiful, quiet beach, and the caption was, "What America will look like after we finish deporting 100 million." And this was right around the time when they were gearing up for Minneapolis. Greg Bovino, you've seen him in his Hugo Boss Nazi trench coats. Greg Bovino, he was the border commander who ran ICE operations in Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Chicago, Charlotte. And he gave interviews where he let slip the plan is to deport 100 million. What is that? That's a third? What do we have here? 360 million people? I can't do the math. 24, 25%? So, we know Donald Trump is insane. So why wouldn't that be the plan? Why wouldn't it be the plan to deport 100 million people? Obviously, you can't. But you can turn a lot of people into third, fourth, fifth class citizens. You can arrest them on trumped up charges. I mean, why do they're going to be building all these for-profit ICE detention centers? Why should only immigrants be forced to live there when there are left-wing wackos who belong in prison? Donald Trump has said that. Donald Trump has repeatedly said, he said it on the campaign trail. He said, I'm not interested in these wars overseas. The real enemy, and he would say, I really believe this. This is what he said. I really believe that the real enemy is within. And who's the enemy within? Democrats, left-wing whack jobs, Black Lives Matter. He said that. They always say, I was kind of surprised what Hitler ended up doing. Well, you should have read Mein Kampf. Should have read Mein Kampf 10 years earlier. We have a lot of Hispanic people who voted for Donald Trump. We have a lot of Arab Americans who voted for Donald Trump, who are expressing outrage now. Well, you should have listened to the speeches. Funny thing about Republican politicians, they try to keep their promises. They try to keep their promises. The Justice Department, this was in Thursday's New York Times, has announced they're going after 384 foreign-born American citizens. And they are trying to denaturalize 384 foreign-born citizens, like Vivek Ramaswamy's mother. She was Indian. She moved to America, gave birth to Vivek. She wasn't a citizen, but now she is. She would be what they call a foreign-born American citizen. And the Justice Department says we've identified 384 foreign-born citizens, and we are going to denaturalize them. And U.S. attorneys around the country have been assigned these cases. So you've heard Donald Trump say he wants to denaturalize Ilhan Omar, the Somali congresswoman from Minneapolis. They're testing the waters now. Denaturalization, revoking people's citizenship. This is the enemy within. This is what Hitler talked about. Blood and soil. Real. Who's a real German? The enemy within. And J.D. Vance is on board all of this, despite being married to a Hindu who is probably one of the 100 million who is going to have to be either denaturalized, deported, or detained. Despicable. J.D. Vance is all in on this heritage American insanity. And that explains why he is the least popular vice president in modern American history. Everybody hates J.D. Vance, including his wife and children. There's new polling from CNN. Vance has experienced what they call a 21-point swing. He had a net positive of 3% when 53% approval rating in January 2025 when he was sworn in as vice president. Now it's 37%. That is the lowest approval rating for any vice president in modern American history at this stage of a presidency. He's going to run in 2028. Erica Kirk is putting all her Turning Point capital into J.D. Vance. Marco Rubio is going to run, the guy who is responsible for tens of millions of people dying overseas as he cuts foreign aid effectively in half. The man responsible for the war in Iran, even though he was against it. Marco Rubio can't get elected. J.D. Vance can't get elected. Who in the Republican Party can get elected? Donald Trump. Donald Trump. We see that he's crazy. So, anyway, some sad news. Former California Republican Congressman Devin Nunes has resigned as the CEO of Trump Media and Technology Group. You might remember Devin Nunes served as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee during the first 2 years of Trump's first presidency. And it was Devin Nunes, a loyal lapdog, who as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee would run up to the Oval Office every time he had information on what the CIA and the FBI had on Russiagate. And because he was so loyal, Trump rewarded Devin Nunes by naming him CEO of Trump Media and Technology Group. That's the parent company of Truth Social. Nunes was making about $1 million a year, running a company that lost $715 million in 2015. Well, the midterms are 6 months away. And Sam Sifton and Evan Gorlick over at the New York Times have some disturbing news for Mike Johnson. If he's planning to hold on to the speaker's gavel after this year's midterms, it's not looking good. But who knows? This was unbelievable. This was in the New York Times. Congress has a 10% approval rating. The New York Times says it's the IRS is more popular than Congress. The New York Times reporting that this Congress, Mike Johnson's Congress, is at record low productivity. There were 362 votes cast last year in the House of Representatives. It's the second lowest count in 25 years, and only 64 bills have become law with Mike Johnson as Speaker. A new Associated Press poll shows 7 in 10 Americans say the economy is not doing well, and they say they believe our country is heading into the wrong direction. There is, according to Politico, 2 new Senate Joint Economic Committees reported that since the illegal war in Iran broke out, families have been forced to pay more than $16 billion extra for gasoline. And since Donald Trump took office again, American families have had to pay $2,300 more on average due to inflation. The Economist says Democrats have a 95% probability right now of taking control of the House of Representatives. The New York Times says the Senate, The Economist says they have a 46% chance of taking the Senate, so not a good chance. The New York Times says that in order for Democrats to take the Senate, they would have to win at least 4 Republican seats and hold on to all their current seats. Well, if this were any other year, if this were any other Republican Party led by any other leader, it would be a safe bet to say November's midterms will be a massive blue tsunami, with Democrats not only poised to take back the House, maybe even the Senate. But this is the age of Donald Trump, where elections are impossible to predict, especially this year's midterms, because quite frankly, there's no guarantee we're going to have them. Or if we do have midterms, there's no guarantee Trump will allow Republicans to accept the results if Republicans go down to defeat. In fact, it's a safe bet that if we do have elections and Republicans lose the House, Trump will insist everything gets challenged in the courts. And our old friends from the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, recently pardoned or given clemency, they will be taken out of mothballs, ready to stand back and stand by on January 3rd, 2027, when the new Congress is about to be sworn in. Donald Trump, for obvious reasons, is terrified of losing one chamber of Congress. Most probably, if this were any other cycle, the House. His presidency would effectively come to an end, and his entire cabinet, as well as past White House employees, would all be subjected to oversight. This is why last year, he started the redistricting wars. He was the one who urged Texas to redraw its map and find 5 new, reliably red congressional seats, which the Texas legislature did. They erased 5 blue Democratic seats. They created what will probably, although there's never any guarantee, especially if this turns out to be a wave election, but if they think they've created 5 red seats. Gavin Newsom warned Texas, if you do this, I have the political capital to redraw California's congressional maps to create 5 reliably blue seats and cancel out your 5 reliably red seats. He put it on the ballot last November, and Californians overwhelmingly voted to give the democratically controlled state legislature permission to gerrymander the congressional maps to find 5 new reliably blue seats. It survived court challenges, and right now, California and Texas have essentially canceled each other out. Now remember, Democrats only need 3 seats to gain control of the House of Representatives. History has shown that a president's party in the midterms will lose, if they control the House, will lose at least 40 seats. So history is not on Trump's side. Indiana is a Republican-controlled state. They resisted Trump's lobbying. He sent J.D. Vance to twist arms. The Indiana State Senate said no. They refused to redraw its maps. Ohio answered the call, and they created 2 Republican seats. Missouri and North Carolina each created 1 Republican seat, and that brought the total of newly redrawn, reliably red congressional seats going into November midterms to 9. So the redistricting wars so far have resulted in 9 reliably blue seats being redrawn so they become reliably red. And Democrats only had 6. You got your 5 from California, and there was 1 carved out in Republican-controlled Utah. But on Tuesday, Virginia voted on whether to give the democratically controlled state house permission to rewrite Virginia's congressional map. So, and this is incredible, so that 10 of the 11 congressional districts from Virginia would be reliably blue, with just Virginia's 9th congressional district down in the southwest corner of the state, only that would be reliably red. So this is Democrats. This is Obama. He was down in Virginia campaigning. This is Hakeem Jeffries, who could end up becoming our next speaker. They're playing hardball because Virginia is not a reliably blue state. Its senators tend to be Democrats. It votes for Democratic candidates for president, but we're not talking landslides. Virginia has Republican governors. In fact, Youngkin, the last governor, was a Republican. And its state legislature is often controlled by Republicans. On Tuesday, Virginia voters narrowly approved. Now, they're going to get 10 Democratic seats now and 1 Republican congressional seat. Tuesday, Virginia voters narrowly approved the new maps, which would create 4 new blue congressional seats, bringing the number of new reliably Democratic seats nationwide to 10, with Republicans having created 9. So right now, it's 10-9. The Democrats are winning the redistricting wars 10-9. And we still have, we being the Democratic Party, we still have Maryland, which may or may not do. We got New York, which if we have to pull out the heavy guns, although that it's going to be hard. The courts But again, remember, Democrats only need to flip 3 seats to win control of the House. We have a lot of overseas listeners. House of Representatives is incredibly important. It's kind of like the House of Parliament. And the Speaker could be the equivalent of a prime minister, but with less power. But theoretically, a Speaker could become more powerful than a president if the Speaker's party has an overwhelming majority in the House. A strong Speaker could emerge as almost a prime minister if his majority is large enough. That Speaker can dictate what goes into a budget and what stays out. And he could pull the plug on any war almost immediately simply by defunding it. So Virginia will only send 1 Republican to Congress. It will send 10 Democrats to Congress, the House of Representatives. They'll send 2 senators, and now, supposedly, 1 Republican to the House of Representatives and 10 Democrats. In a state where 3 million people voted on Tuesday on a redistricting measure that passed by only 90,000 votes. This is hardball because if it weren't the age of Trump, I would say this is unfair. You had massive voter turnout. 44% of registered voters cast a ballot on Tuesday. Do you think this is fair? Except for the fact that we're fighting fascism. You have 48.6% of Virginians voting against this redistricting measure. Trump got 46% of the vote in Virginia in 2024. Harris got 52%. So this was much tighter. Wasn't that popular? You have Republicans living in Virginia. I don't know how many. I don't know how many registered Republicans there are. I don't know how many are prone to vote Republican. I'm going to say anywhere between 40 to 46% of the people in Virginia are prone to vote Republican, but they will only have one Republican member of Congress compared to 10 Democratic members of Congress. Doesn't seem fair. Kind of outrageous. Kind of suggests that the Democrats aren't messing around. And Republicans are going to challenge this in the courts, but it's generally agreed that the courts won't touch this, especially the Supreme Court, which has said we won't even look at a newly redrawn congressional map if it's been drawn to favor one party over another. And that's called partisan gerrymandering. What went on in Virginia is partisan gerrymandering, where we're the Democrats, we have control, we're going to rewrite maps so it favors the Democrats. California is partisan gerrymandering. Texas was racial gerrymandering. We have memos from Harmeet Dillon from the Civil Rights Office of the Justice Department, Trump's Justice Department, saying, here are 5 reliably Black and Hispanic Democratic congressional districts. This is where you should start rewriting maps. Well, that's called racial gerrymandering, and that the Supreme Court will not allow racial gerrymandering. But if it's just partisan gerrymandering, the Supreme Court says, have at it. We're not getting involved. It's up to the state Supreme Courts to decide that. The Supreme Court, this could change though. And it may have happened when this show started. I don't know. The Supreme Court is poised to rule on Louisiana versus Calais. It involves the Voting Rights Act. And it would change the calculus in next November's midterms. This case, if the Supreme Court rules on it soon, and if they rule on the side of the plaintiff, it would challenge a section, it would overturn a section of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, I believe, which mandated that states from the old Confederacy go out of their way to draw congressional districts that are called majority-minority. What is a majority-minority congressional district? That is a congressional district where the majority of the people living in that district are members of a minority group. Benny Thompson from Mississippi, it represents a majority-minority congressional district where a majority of the people in that district are black. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 insisted that the old Confederacy go out of its way to draw congressional maps so that black neighborhoods and Hispanic neighborhoods are able to send somebody to the House of Representatives. And there are two majority-minority congressional districts in Louisiana. There are two congressional districts in Louisiana that are majority-minority, and a group of white civil rights activists representing white people say these two majority-minority congressional districts disenfranchise white voters. They argue that the provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1965 mandating that states from the old Confederacy carve out at least one majority-minority congressional district, they claim it's outlived its purpose. Their argument, and we saw this in Shelby, the Roberts Court ruled in Shelby that we are now a post-racial society and that people of color no longer need the protections given to them under the Civil Rights Act. In Shelby, the Roberts Court ruled the old Confederacy doesn't need prior approval to change its voting laws. Before the Shelby decision, the Justice Department was authorized to approve any changes that states in the old Confederacy made to their voting laws. There were a couple of other northern districts, but primarily it was if you were a state from the old Confederacy and you have a long storied history of blocking black people from voting, the Civil Rights Act said you cannot change your voting laws unless it's pre-approved by the United States Justice Department. The Roberts Court in Shelby ruled, no, this is a post-racial society. Black people have no problem voting. And the first thing all the states in the old Confederacy did after the Roberts Court handed down the Shelby ruling was pass laws making it impossible for people of color to vote. Voter ID, all that stuff. Okay. So there is a possibility that the Supreme Court will hand down a decision saying majority-minority congressional districts mandated by the Voting Rights Act have outlived their purpose. And if the courts rule like that, then every state in the old Confederacy, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, they will get to work immediately redrawing maps, or at least trying to redraw congressional maps before the midterms to eliminate all their majority-minority congressional districts. And that would eliminate at least a dozen reliably blue congressional seats in the South. At least a dozen. And that would make it next to impossible for Democrats to, some say, ever reclaim control of the House of Representatives. So the Supreme Court, they did it in June of 2024 on the immunity ruling. They saved Trump's ass in 2024. This court in Calais, is that the name of, let me look at my notes, Louisiana versus Calais. They may have already issued a ruling. I haven't seen, gotten a memo, a text from anyone when the show started. So the court issues its last rulings of the term in June, and then it goes supposedly on vacation until October. If the court rules in favor of the plaintiffs before June, it could give states time to redraw their maps. More importantly, it would give Donald Trump a reason to call into question the results of the 2026 midterms. Now, it would be a mess because the Supreme Court says we will not look at any redrawn congressional maps unless they're based on racial gerrymandering. So if you're redrawing maps to get rid of majority-minority congressional districts, that is gerrymandering. That is racial gerrymandering, which the Supreme Court said we have to approve. So that would delay, theoretically, they could overturn, they could say that majority-minority congressional districts are unconstitutional and that section of the Voting Rights Act must be struck. And then the states during the summer would begin redrawing congressional maps along racial lines. So there would be challenges before the courts. And we wouldn't have a real decision on all these maps until way after the midterms. But that's enough chaos for Donald Trump to claim that all the Democrats who won majority-minority congressional districts in the South are illegitimate. So he'll send like a second slate of members of Congress to be sworn in on January 3rd, 2027. Oh, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't try that. Oh, you know he would. You know he would. These people, you know, you can't. I remember thinking after Nixon resigned, well, that's it. With the Republic, they don't go away. John Eastman was one of the lawyers who invented the phony elector scheme back in 2020. He also came up with the loony reading of the Constitution that convinced Trump that Mike Pence didn't have to certify the votes on January 6th. Well, they don't go away. Eastman was officially disbarred by the California State Supreme Court this week. Still a gun for hire. Still, you give him enough money, he'll claim voter fraud. I don't know if you remember, but a deep red state Senate seat in Texas flipped blue. It was like a 40-point swing. And Eastman, collecting a check from somebody, was claiming irrefutable proof of voter fraud. I have it. I have irrefutable proof of voter fraud. After the Virginia referendum won for the Democrats, first thing out of Donald Trump's mouth was, it was rigged. It was rigged. All right. One final thing, and then I'm going to end it. All of this may not matter, because if there's a massive blue wave, and I'm not saying there's going to be, we might end up with something called dummy mandering. And that is what might be preventing Governor Ron DeSantis from redrawing the maps in Florida. There's only so much jelly you can spread. There's only so much red jelly, raspberry jelly, that you can spread over a state to create new districts. So DeSantis is under pressure now to redraw Florida's congressional maps. I think they want to get rid of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's district. I think they're going after Jared Moskowitz's district. They want to redraw so that those are reliably red. But some Republicans in Florida are saying, we used to be a swing state where we suppress the vote, we make sure black people can't vote, but there are a lot of Democrats here. And if you start spreading Republican jelly all around, there aren't enough Republican voters, and that's dummy mandering. That's a new term. And that means you've spread the Republican vote so thin, you not only lose the newly drawn map, but you make the reliably red district, where you took voters from to create a new reliably red district, you make that reliably red district. You dilute that district, and it makes it easier for Democrats to win. All right. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. We go live every Sunday night. My next show is live at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. And then Tuesday at 6:05 Eastern. And then Thursday at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. 7 nights a week at 8:30 p.m. We do clips. We just put up a clip. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room, if anybody is still here. I don't know. I went long today. We had technical problems, as you can tell. So I kind of talked, and I was angry about my technical problems, and so I worked out my anger issues by passively aggressively doing an exceptionally long show. I am sorry. I really want these shows to be an hour. Okay. I will see everybody live 6:05 p.m. Eastern Sunday night. And I am going to do a long clip Saturday night, like we did last Saturday night at 8:30 p.m., where I go into the chat room and serve crudités and drinks. And I'll watch a clip of the show on Saturday night at 8:30 with you. Oh, there was a poll, right? Let me see the results. Is anybody still here? I had a poll. Let me see the results of the poll. Hello. I should have Did anything happen that I need to know about? I can't find the poll. Hang on. It's like a Twilight Zone episode. Like, what if I'm just imagining all this? There we go. Hello, everybody. Is Mila here? Hi, Mila. Okay. Let me end the poll. So, who's going to be fired next is the question. And the choices were Kash Patel, J.D. Vance, or Melania. And we have 1,260 votes cast in the chat room. 9% said Melania, 5% said J.D. Vance, 86% said Kash Patel. Thank you all in the chat room. I just published the results in the chat room. Thank you all for being civil in the chat room. Thank you to Bob. Okay. Bye. 6:05 p.m. Eastern Sunday night. 5 p.m. Eastern Sunday night.